Welcome to TheatreMix Advanced Workflows training, designed to revolutionize the way you manage wireless mics and streamline your theatrical productions. I'm Dan Nagel, founder and CEO of Tech Direction, and today's training is proudly hosted by Lighthouse Festival in their Port Dover theater space. Special thanks to Derek Ritchell, Artistic Director, and Haley Parker, Technical Director, for working with us to make this event happen just as they're starting their summer season. We're thrilled to be joined by James Holt, the developer of TheatreMix. With years of experience mixing live audio for theatrical productions, James set out to create a solution to the challenges he faced. TheatreMix is the result of that endeavor, a tool that simplifies managing numerous wireless mics, automates DCA programming, and enables advanced scene management, making tech weeks less hectic and allowing you to focus on the mix, not just the scenes. James continues to mix shows using his own software and is eager to share his insights and expertise with audio engineers around the world. We're going to dive into some advanced workflows in TheatreMix, building off our last session with James. Whether you're dealing with multiple wireless mics or looking to enhance your scene management workflow, this session will provide you with the knowledge and tools you need. Today, we'll learn how to navigate TheatreMix and build our first show on any supported console. We're here to support you in your journey to mastering TheatreMix and elevating your theatrical productions. For more information, resources, or to get in touch with our team for any theater tech needs, visit our website at techdirection.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. If you're working on a project and would like a quote or consultation to make sure you get the right technology, email us at projects@techdirection.com.
Here we are now. So today is going to be a bit of a follow-on session. So we had a original session a few months ago. So particularly for those of you watching this in the future on YouTube, I definitely recommend you check out part 1 because that'll provide a lot of context around what we're going to talk about today. So that original video covered sort of the evolution of wireless microphone control for musical theatre, some background on how TheatreMix itself came to be, and also the basics of how to some cues. Cool. So today will be a deeper dive into some more features in TheatreMix, and also touch on some advanced workflows. So where we left off last time, we had this show here called The Snow Queen. This is a pantomime I mixed several years ago now, and so obviously TheatreMix is designed to be used on the sort of musicals and plays we all know and love, but to avoid upsetting any intellectual property rights holders, today is going to be using this as an example. Cool. So I guess last time what we went through, we allocated all the channels. So here in show setup, we've got all the channels allocated through. We recorded some cues and we marked up a script, which I have here. So we ended up with a bit of script markup. We talked about ways to do that. So today is really more about more advanced features. So to start off with, I want to talk about, let's talk about level offsets. Okay, so obviously when you mix in a dynamic theatre show, you have to constantly track the level of everything happening during the show. Everything changes night to night. Performance may be weak or may be strong. We may have different people playing in the band. You can't just sort of recall levels and expect it to be the same every time. Within a show, there's often moments where particular cast members may be strong in some moments, or they may pull back. It's not uncommon to have someone who's like a really strong singer, but then is not as prominent as delivering dialogue, or vice versa. They could deliver dialogue really well, but then pull back when they're singing. So from time to time, you may need to adjust the levels of channels relative to each other. So say, for instance, in this ensemble here, this female ensemble, we've got, say, Kate is, she's a really strong singer, but her dialogue's quite quiet. So we want to have her mic nominally throughout the show at a level that's suitable for dialogue. So when you throw in dialogue to say, I don't know, -10, for instance, her voice is going to be the same as everybody else for dialogue. But then when she sings in this ensemble here, she's actually quite loud. She belts really loud and she actually sticks to the mix too much. And so whenever she's in an ensemble with other people, we need to pull her back a few dB relative to the others because she's always going to be a bit louder. So these level offsets here allow you to do that. So that means that in this cue, Kate's fader will be pulled back 3 dB from where it is nominally. And so what I mean by that is it's not an absolute recall. It's obviously as you go through the show, due to mic placement slips and things like that, you may need to make little fader adjustments as you go. I tend to, particularly for like ensembles, I'll often, at the end of the show, my fader is a little bit janky, a little bit all over the place because it's just how they're performing on the day. But in this particular cue, we know that she's going to be super loud, and we want it to be 3 dB quieter than she is normally, and then come back. So what TheatreMix does is you can set a level offset here, and what that'll do is TheatreMix tracks the level of all the channels throughout the show, and then when it hits this cue, it'll go, okay, Kate needs to be 3 dB quieter for this cue, and then it'll pull her back relative to where she was before, and then in the next cue, it'll put it back up to 0, not absolute 0, but 0 relative to where she is. So the aim of this is not for TheatreMix to mix the show for you. It's not that at all. It's not designed to do like big bulk level changes. If you try and do stuff like if you try and set all these to like minus 10 dB, it's going to throw a warning at you saying, "Are you sure this is not a great idea?" Because obviously the intention is particularly mixing musicals, the levels have to be relative. The relative balance between leads and ensembles and band and everything else changes night to night. So that's something you always have to control with your fingers. But this sort of inter-channel level stuff is kind of similar every night, and so it can be programmed to some extent. One thing you can do with this is you can put the numbers in here directly, and also when you do, they come up with a little underline. It tells you how much you've offset them by. What you can do on the console is a record feature. So what some people tend to do is do a rehearsal of the show, take a multi-track recording, and then come back the next day, play the recording back to the console, and then just mix manually. Okay, these channels are a bit too loud, these are a bit too quiet. And so there's a record mode where you hit record in TheatreMix, and then you adjust the levels. TheatreMix will capture those changes for you into that cue. So then when you play back that cue the next time, those level changes you made in the sort of virtual sound check kind of thing will carry through and be part of the show programming, which is kind of cool. So level control, not designed to mix the show, but designed to solve very specific issues where you're balancing levels back and forth. And I've had a few make it a bit nicer, because for some people, obviously, they to program this into every cue can be a bit annoying every time the Kate's in on CB. Sometimes it's consistent, sometimes not. It really depends on the show. I'm sort of still sorting up how to implement that, how I could possibly implement that in a way that makes sense, because at least for me, when I'm using this, I find each song's different, particularly if the song's in different parts of actors' vocal ranges. So some, if they're belters, then the belty alto parts will come through really hard, but then if they're singing a soft line, maybe not so much. So I find it varies from number to number, but other people I've talked to, they find it fairly consistent. So it's a useful tool to have without pushing all the faders on desk all the time. Cool. The next thing I wanted to look at is backup channels. So when you have, particularly, it depends on most big shows that the top 2 or 3 leads quite often are not off stage for any amount of time. They're just on stage constantly. So if their mic element fails, it's not a great thing. It's potentially a show stop because you can't hear them, or they've got to get a handheld out or something. It's not great. So if you have the ability to double mic characters, it's super powerful, because then if one of their heads gets waterlogged during the show, or you have a cable failure or something, you can switch to the backup, and it's super easy. So in TheatreMix, there's a couple of ways to do this. The original feature is just a hard backup. So in this case here, I can say, okay, channel 25 is going to be the backup for Jack. And so what that does is it blanks out Jack down here in the in show setup. So if we connect to a console to run this show, how do you move this thing out of the way? Anyway, and we fire some cues. So notice down here in the channel show, we now have these entries for Jack. And so what this is indicating is the green one is indicating that Jack is on his primary mic 1. If you double click on that, it'll switch to the backup. Obviously, double clicking on stuff on a screen is not particularly useful during a show to switch mics. The main method to switch it is actually to tap the DCA mute button. So when you have any backup mics in use in TheatreMix, the DCA mute buttons become disabled. If you tap a DCA mute, it's going to do nothing on the console. It gets immediately reversed out. What it does do, though, if there is a backup mic on that DCA, it'll swap it. So the idea is if you're mixing a show and Jack's talking or Jack's singing, and then you hear a crackle or you hear a pop or there's some noise, you just smack the DCA mute button and straight away it's going to swap out the mic. The swap is, on most consoles, it's pretty imperceptible. It's done as a mute, unmute. So only one mic is active at a time for a fraction of a second. And it's surprisingly, obviously it's best to do it when they're breathing or like in the middle of a phrase or something rather than when they're actually singing a note. But even so, even if you do that, it's the transition is far smoother than I expected. There's no real gap. There's no real gap in the audio on most consoles. It's pretty smooth. And so backup mic's super powerful. And if you're using, say, channel profiles to do different EQs for hats and stuff, there are separate settings stored for the backup channels as well as the primary channels. So in the case where you might have like a boom as a primary and a hairline mic as a secondary, or a boom and an ear, you can have different EQ, different gain on them, and line check them to have different profiles for hats or whatever you need. Because the elements might be different, placement might be different. They're not going to sound exactly the same, but with this, you can get them sounding, get the gain structure as close as possible. And then when you hit that DCA mute, it's going to be very imperceptible to the audience. You've actually swapped to the backup mic. A separate backup feature is if you don't have the luxury of lots of spare transmitters, you can nominate a spare backup transmitter here. So what this does is it gets taken out of the pool of channels, so it's not in here anymore. But then it's then allowed to float. So we have this little icon here, assign spare. So the idea with this is that you have a spare pack, it's powered up, the gain structure is set similar to everything else, but it's sitting there in the wings, ready to be used when it's ready to go. So if you click this allocate spare, Jack obviously can't be given one because he has a fixed backup, but you can pick any channel to allocate it to. So if you pick the channel, let's say Gerda's mic fails, she's off stage, it's getting changed up. You get a message from the A2, okay, spare pack's going on Gerda. All right, allocate to Gerda. And so when you click the button, you give them the choice. You can either allocate it and switch it to Gerda now, or switch it later. Most of the time you want to switch now. Usually this happens. Usually this kind of stuff happens, in the middle of a scene, like off stage. There's time to do it. So hit switch now. And so now Gerda has now got an entry down here. So we didn't, Gerda wasn't assigned the mic in the show setup. We assigned that to her dynamically throughout the show as the show went on. And then we switched that from here. So what's cool is that this is now works the same as the standard backup. So the program is going to track through and everything's going to sound the same. It doesn't do, which I'm contemplating building a feature for. It doesn't transfer EQ settings or anything like that from the primary. So the assumption is that the spare backup channel has been line checked, has a similar gain structure, and if you need to do any radical EQ stuff, you sort of have to do it on the fly. Again, it also comes down to some people have spare packs but have the same headsets. Other people may have different headsets, and so you can't necessarily take an EQ profile or dynamics profile and then slap it on the spare. It may not be appropriate. So flexibility, yeah. Cool. So now that it's on Gerda, she's now got this. It kept the programming carries through. If you want to get off Gerda, so say it's interval, got a bit of time to breathe, found out the issue with her primary pack, you can swap her back again by double clicking in the tray. So that's pushed it back to 4. Or you can, if it's in a live scene, you can tap the DCA mute. DCA mute also, once it's been allocated, the DCA mute also works for spare backup channels. And then up here, you can then go, okay, remove the allocation. It's gone. And so now the spare backup's free to be used for something else in the future. There's some Q&A things here. Okay, cool. I'll get to those a bit later. Yeah. Cool. One question I often get from people is, will TheatreMix support multiple spare mics? So say you've got 2X backstage. The problem is, for me, is it makes the user interface model quite difficult, because if suddenly you have multiple spare backups, is it spare 1 or spare 2 or spare 3? How do you go? But also philosophically, my view on this is, if you have the resources to have multiple spare packs, I found generally it's better to spend the time to actually make the packs and the headsets and the cables and the connectors and the joins and all that sort of stuff. Spend time sort of engineering those who are reliable, rather than rustling up spare packs. You might fail, right? It's a bit like, it's I can't think of a good insurance analogy here, but to me, prevention's better to prevent the issue happening in the first place than to expect things to fail and have all these backups that then you need a whole lot of nasty programming to deal with on the day. So that's philosophically, that's one of the reasons why it only supports one spare pack, is because if you need more than one spare pack, then it's probably better things to spend your time on, rather than trying to work out ways to get multiple spare packs into the show. At least for me, I spent many years trying different connector types, different types of strain relief, different fitting methods. Like, there's a lot of variables involved in putting these mics on actors, and you can spend a lot of time just trying different strain reliefs and dropping the pack by its cable. What happens? All this sort of stuff. That to me is far more useful to sort of create a more robust process and procedures and ways to use mics, rather than having all the spares that you then have to break out during the show, and it's messy and it's panic and everything else. Cool. Okay. So,
James, we've got a question online here, if I can interject.
Yep. Sure.
Will there be in the future cut, copy, paste, and drag around cues? Just to fix programming on the fly without copying every single DCA to a different line.
Yep. You can kind of sort of do that now with cloning. So say we're in this scene 7 here. There is an option, clone to end, which is essentially a copy paste of cues. So that'll add the whole cue right to the end there. Moving around and dragging stuff, I'm still trying to work out a way that makes sense. It's one of those things everybody's like, oh, just make things drag, it's so cool. I'm like, yeah, but it's semantically it's quite different to, particularly if you're using this during a show, you don't want to have easy ways to break stuff. So drag and drop, yes, it's something I'm thinking about, but it's not a simple thing to implement, particularly when you've got like multiple targets and multiple sources. It gets messy. But in terms of moving cues around, renumbering is the way to do it. So if I want to push this up to like 17.5, that'll then push it to there. So moving them around is renumbering. And if you want to copy a cue, easiest way is just to do clone to end. And I find I often do that for like reprises and stuff. You'll do a song once and then there's a reprise later on. It's like, oh, cool, it's the same song again. Clone it to the end. Has a similar result. Okay. All right. Actors. So, particularly post-COVID, but also with a lot of children's theatre and stuff too, we've found that multiple casting has become a lot more common than it used to be. It used to be very much, multiple casts was sort of the realm of the big top-end shows. They had lots of understudies or A/B casting and stuff. But this has sort of ended up coming down the line as you have lots of understudies for people who get sick and whatever. Or there's A/B casting, so there's always a backup cast for a whole show. So TheatreMix has this thing called actors. Yeah, okay. So by default, there's no actors defined. And so this looks very similar to what we use for channel profiles, which talks about in the last video. But essentially what this does is instead of channel profiles are designed to cover sort of processing changes within a show. So say we're putting on hats, or if you've got a mic that swaps between actors, or like vocal effects and stuff you want to do, the channel profiles are used to sort of affect tonality within the show. During the show, I should say. Whereas actors is more about setting up a show, setting up a different cast to play roles in a show, rather than changes that within a show. So say Jack here, we have 2 actors that play Jack. So say Fred is the name of actor 1, and say Bob. Bob also plays Jack. So what you can do is, because these actors may have slightly different voices or slightly different placements of the mics in their heads or what sort of stuff, you can store processing parameters here and then nominate which ones play in the role. So we've set up Fred and Bob as 2 actors. Jack is the character, so I'm just going to hit OK. This is going to reconnect. So what that's done now is we should see it's taken all the current settings in the console, the EQ and dynamic settings, load that into the actor called Fred. So by default, this doesn't really do anything. Like it's just stored them, hasn't done much. Then the next day, if Bob's playing the role, we can say, okay, Bob's playing the role now. And now we make some changes. Bob's voice needs a different HPF, or he's got a bitey part of his voice that's sort of 4K. You need to trim down that EQ a bit. You make those changes, do the show, and that's all fine. Save the file the next day, and come through the show the next day, and Fred's back. So you can click on Fred here. When you connect to the console, it actually prompts you each time if actors are in use. Go back to Fred and say hit this, and then when it connects, it'll then recall the settings from Fred from 2 days ago. So this is powerful for individual actors or like unexpected understudies or that sort of stuff, because it allows you, particularly if A/B casting. So you can have the mix sound. What am I trying to say? Have the processing of the channel reflect that actor's voice. And so if that actor's a regular, or even an unexpected understudy, you just want to store the settings you've got already, you've got that choice here. Where it gets really powerful, and particularly this is useful for like high school shows, is you might often have a whole A/B cast. So you may have a whole, maybe not the whole cast, but a large portion may be played by different actors each night. It's concept of groups. So based on which actors are selected, so this is probably a facetious example. I'll just add a couple more just to let's do Mary, let's do Jess. Let's say Jess is playing it that night. So say on this is like our cast A configuration, we'll call it, is Jess playing the fairy and Fred playing Jack. So if we save this as cast A, and then cast B is the other way around. So it's Jack, Mary playing the fairy. So you can say this is cast B. So what this means is that when we come to do, when you come to load up the show the next day, you can pick which cast is being used. And so this is just, essentially, it's just a summary pick of the actors being involved. But if you've got, say, 15, 20 actors swapping between roles, this is obviously quite powerful to just have them all grouped into one thing. You say, okay, today I want cast A, hit the button, and it'll just pick those out for you. Cool. I don't think anything else but actors I want to talk about. Yeah, I guess similar to profiles, all this stuff's done transparently. So save the show file at the end of the night, obviously, but as soon as you have an actor involved, TheatreMix is constantly capturing all the processing parameters. So as you change EQs, as you change dynamics, or whatever you select up here, it's going to be written into the actor and stored. Cool. Okay. So TheatreMix is really good at doing this DCA programming stuff for radio mics. That's what really shines. That's what it's designed to do. But obviously, when you automate and show there's other stuff you might want to control too. Things like, effects units changes, or maybe some band routing or some fallback routing, or things that aren't primarily to do with radio mics and DCAs per se, but other stuff you might want to pick up on the console. So what TheatreMix does for that is it gives a couple of options. So for X32 and 32 consoles, they have these things called snippets, which are essentially, how to explain it? It's selectively recorded console parameters, I guess. So it's like I want to record the the send on the FX send on this channel or something like that, or I want to record just the mute on this instrument for the band or so forth. So they're really powerful because they're so exclusive. What compared to scenes or snapshots, which record everything and then you select what you recall. Snippets are really, you very selectively pick and choose what you want to record, and then you can pick it up later on. The other thing TheatreMix can do, which is applicable to more consoles, is recall scenes recorded on the console, which seems a bit counterintuitive because, like, kind of the whole point of TheatreMix is to not rely on console scenes and all that clunky programming. But it can be very useful for stuff that TheatreMix can't control, or to create some demarcation. So I guess probably the bigger point here is around most people generally use TheatreMix to manage the radio mics, but then on the same console or maybe on a different console, you've got the band and maybe some sound effects and stuff. And so this is sort of a nice way to demarcate control. So you can say, okay, TheatreMix is going to manage everything to do with the radio mics, or the DCA assignments, FX bus, sends, positions, all that sort of thing. But then maybe some musical numbers require some small change to the band mix. And so that's all going to be handled on, say, console scenes. And so that way, when you're setting up the console scenes, you set up your recall scopes and all that sort of stuff to not affect the radio mic channels, and they just recall the other parts of the console that TheatreMix doesn't nominally control. And like it actually worked quite well for that, because typically if you're doing, particularly for like a band mixes, it's usually like kind of an absolute recall. You want to just move everything to where it was in the rehearsal and make it sound right. There's less, not zero, but there's generally less variance with band stuff than there is with vocals. So if we turn this on, if we want to now edit this, we can now pull in a console scene. But yes, so it will pull in the names of all the scenes on your console, and then you can pick, okay, I want scene 4 to be recalled in this queue, for instance. I'm not going to do it because it's going to break things in this show. In the scenes I have in this console are not global. They're going to blow everything away. But for instance, yeah, if you've recorded band scenes to make band moves or like change effects units, patching and stuff like that, you can put them in here. You can also just type them in. If I want to recall scene 3, you can put, say, scene 3 there, which I'm going to undo because I don't want that to happen right now. And so that is a way for some people. There's different ways to run TheatreMix, which I'll get into a bit later on around like control hierarchies. But if your show is primarily microphone cues, most shows are primarily DCA cues, but then you want to automate a few band things or some effects patches or something else, it makes sense to recall console scenes from here, because you're going to end up firing more DCA cues, less console scenes. Put them in here. It's kind of handy. Okay, got that. Playback. So I haven't prepared a QLab file, so I'll just grab. It's because TheatreMix is designed to take button control off the console. So for most of the time when you're running TheatreMix cues, you'll use console buttons to advance back and forth. So one thing that's handy with that is you can also then use those consoles to control playback software, or whatever. So on Macs, so QLab is pretty much like the industry standard for playback on Macs. Although I know you guys just had a workshop with Chris with Canvas, and Canvas is super cool. I need to. I played with the beta a while ago. I need to actually get back into it again. But it's Canvas is also very cool. It's on my list to look at that a bit closer. But for now, on Macs, TheatreMix supports QLab, and on Windows it supports Show Queue System (SCS), and it also supports Q Player, which are both sort of reasonably popular, also equivalents of QLab on PCs. So the simplest thing you can do for QLab control is just set some buttons. So here I've got an X32. And if I just want to have a QLab, a go button for my, oops, not that like that. If I want to have a go button for QLab, I can just say, cool, QLab go. And so what that'll do is, as soon as that's enabled, TheatreMix will then connect to QLab, and you'll see the little green Q there. That means that it'll control QLab on the same computer that's running TheatreMix. So this QLab for Macs or SCS or QPlay for Windows, if you run it on the same computer, it'll just find the application running there and automatically connect. So I can't, the console's in another room, so I can't get to it at the moment. But what happens is obviously you press the button on the console and it'll fire the cues in QLab for you. So there's a few options for this. Typically it's sort of go and stop. So stop is a combination of go and back. I use that for shows with tracks often, because if I end up firing tracks, when you stop the track, you want to just go back to the start of it and redo it again in tech. Things want to be rerun. But there's also panic and pause and resume. So for more complex QLab stuff, you might not want to stop back. You might just want to panic out, or you may want to pause and resume. There's other options there. So these can all be set on buttons. And these the buttons can be set on any of the consoles that TheatreMix supports. So that's sort of the simple way to do QLab control. But the thing is though, that gives you two sets of buttons, which some people like, some people don't like. I think for me, I've found it depends on how long the show is running for. If I'm doing a really short run of a show, I find having the two buttons is better, because then I'm not worried about what I'm doing. But if I'm doing a longer run of a show, then I want to have it on a single button, because you just want to have one button to hit, and you're mixing, cue. You're not thinking about which one to hit. So what you can do in TheatreMix is you can do QLab control. So this option here allows you to assign a tag. It's like what I was seeing just before with console scenes, pulling console data. You can also recall a QLab cue with a TheatreMix cue. And so a note here for those using QLab 5, you'll have to put a passcode in here by default. It's in the setup. I haven't got QLab 5 on this machine, but by default, there's no OSC passcode. It's in the FAQ how to get to it, but you have to put that in there. And there's also an option for press on back. If you're going back through cues, it won't fire the QLab stuff. Anyway, so let's turn that on. And we now have a QLab column. So if we go to our QLab file, we have our QLab cue numbers here. And so say Q2. So say we want to fire QLab Q2 with this TheatreMix cue. So I'm just going to push that out of the way there. And this is going to sound terrible, but let's do it. So if we fire the cue, don't know if you can hear that, but it is playing. I hit Command L, we'll set it running. So that's if you want to fire playback cues as you're firing DCAs. So again, a bit like the scenes thing, a bit like it depends on what the show is, what your workflow is. Some people like this, some people don't. One thing it is super powerful for though is if you want to control other devices. So maybe you don't want to have your actual playback cues firing with DCA changes, because maybe it might be a bit uncomfortable. But for instance, if you say want to control another console or send control information to other devices, I've had people who have had they needed to send like OSC or MIDI triggers to lighting consoles, and so what they've done is called a QLab cue with this recalled a QLab cue in this cue, and then in QLab used the control features in QLab to then control other devices. So it's a cool way to extend stuff that way. You can get quite complicated, because obviously TheatreMix, you fire the TheatreMix cue, it calls QLab to do some playback, but then that also controls like a lighting cue maybe or something else. Could even call something on another console. If you have two consoles running, you might be able to call it like a band scene on different consoles. So there's ways to sort of stack things up. It can get quite complex, but also really cool that it's all sort of controlled from one thing and it all sort of goes from there. I'm just going to delete that just to keep that. And this is obviously free text, because QLab cue numbers are not. You can put whatever you like in here. You can put that in, and that's valid. So you can type anything you want here, and that'll work. One What some people prefer to do, though, is to work the other way. Some people have workflows, quite established workflows, where like QLab is their master cue list, and a bit like this, maybe they're controlling some automation stuff or whatever, and they prefer to have QLab as the master list and then have everything follow from that. So that also works too. TheatreMix has an OSC API that is documented in the feature guide. But if I just not that one, this one. If I do this, so if I just set up a new network mesh, this is what is in QLab 4, QLab 5 from memory, so it's slightly different. We've just set up a patch here, and then we can create a network queue. Whilst I've done this, we want this to go there. We want this to go jump. That'll do. We fire that. All right, that worked. So if you want, instead of having TheatreMix control QLab or SCS if you're on Windows, or QPlay, all those things, you can go the other way around. So if you've got an established workflow and you use QLab as like your primary queues, you can use network queues to send an OSC message into TheatreMix to tell TheatreMix which queue to jump to. It also supports Go and Back and a few other things. But if you're doing this kind of queue list linking stuff, again, it's very easy for stuff to get out of sync. So generally my recommendation is put absolute queue numbers in here, because then if I that, it's gone there. So then as you're moving stuff around, it's always going to refer back to the right thing. But yeah, this is similar to TheatreMix for calling QLab queues. In QLab or other OSC clients, you can actually tell TheatreMix to pull a queue in. And if that works for you, but yeah, for some people it's better for your workflow. That's cool.
Sorry, James.
All right.
Quick question.
Yes.
Can you, with something like Canvas or anything else, can you within TheatreMix send a straight up OSC?
No. So it's fairly tightly integrated. So it's
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Try not to make things too complex, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So I need to talk
So what
to Chris
are the options
stuff
again? So you've got QLab and you had a couple of
QLab and SCS and QPlayer on Windows. And basically the controls are button controls, which is all the stuff here, or you can recall specific queues that are linked. That's sort of the options from within TheatreMix. And then from outside TheatreMix, you can tell TheatreMix, okay, I want to go to this, jump to this queue instead.
Okay, cool. Great.
Cool.
And you can use anything else with OSC
to
do that.
Which is a great segue into my next thing, which is Companion, which again, I don't have that's on my other dev machine. So for those of you who use Stream Decks, like Bitfocus Companion is a super popular piece of software for using with Stream Decks to do like hardware remote buttons. So back in the X32 theatre control days, I had a request from someone who they had a show where they needed to do a lot of live editing. It was like an improv type thing where they'd essentially like not entirely build the queue list on the fly, but they'd have to do a lot of like live be mixing a show and need to do live changes at the same thing. And so in Companion, there's the module for TheatreMix. In version 2, it's under X32 Theatre Control, but version 3 and up, it's called TheatreMix. And so that has a whole lot of control options. So it's using the same OSC protocol that QLab uses, but it's set up with a whole lot of editing things. And so, I don't know what to say. Most people generally use it for just back and go controls. But you can do stuff like lock and unlock editing, copy queues, move the edit selector around and around, jump to specific queues, all that sort of stuff. You can also control backups. So if you want to assign the spare backup, you can do that with a keypad rather than clicky with the mouse. And swap backup mics back and forth. It's quite powerful. You can also do record offsets too, which is that record around levels. So it's super powerful. And that's all just part of Companion. So if you go into Companion, look in TheatreMix, and then there's a whole lot of preset buttons that are already defined with pretty pictures and things. Drag those into your layout. And And what's cool about Companion is it also works with, I mean, there's now, I think there's a Stream Deck pedal now, because I know some people like using pedals to advance cues. And so there's ways to do that with MIDI groups and GPIO on consoles, but if there's the Stream Deck pedal also works kind of cool. And loop decks and other devices as well. So yeah, Companion is, again, super cool tool. I personally generally use it for editing. I find it more useful as an editing thing to have in Tech Week. If they edit stuff on the fly rather than something I actually run a show off, but other people like running shows off them. So, whatever works. Okay. Oh, Q&A just came through. I'm going to click on this, see if it lets me. Is there a list of MIDI notes you can use? Okay. MIDI. So this comes up a bit. So the way TheatreMix works is it communicates with all the consoles over Ethernet. But in order to make the buttons work for actions, the console has to do something in order for TheatreMix to detect that something's happened. So for consoles like the TF series and the bigger Ellen and Heath ones, the GLD, Avantis, D-Live, and so forth, they just use mute groups. So because mute groups aren't used in theatre much. So what I do is when I detect a mute group, when TheatreMix detects a mute group changing, it then uses that to invoke an action. But on some other consoles, including X32 and 32, QLCL, and the SQ series, I actually, by default, it actually uses MIDI buttons. So when you look at the button on the console, it's a MIDI button. Like, why is there a MIDI button here? But it's the MIDI value is literally just there. It's literally just used so that TheatreMix picks something up. So the TheatreMix actually looks for the button. I think it's the button LED lighting up rather than the actual MIDI thing itself. So the values that when you configure buttons, it'll put MIDI values in, but they're kind of arbitrary. It doesn't really matter what they are. They just have to be something. So off the top of my head, I can't remember what it uses. But if you don't like it, you can just change it, and it won't care because it's not even looking at the value at all. It's just picked a default value just so there's something there for the console to use. Cool. All right. Remote control, how are we going? Move assignments. Okay. Which is actually what I used before this session. So in the last video, we talked about utilization view, how you can use that to track through how assignments go through a show, which is super powerful to see when mics are on, or if there's mic swaps happening or character changes or all that sort of thing. You can sort of track things through, and there's also editing functions here, so you can edit these and change who's in the stuff, or you can add mics into a DCA if you want. That's all available there. But there's this function here called move assignments. So this is to initially split tracks is sort of the thing I came up with, like what I thought about, but it's been used for other things too. The idea is that if you've got a role, generally an ensemble role, that then gets split across multiple people, you can then sort of programmatically go through and do a find replace. So it's kind of like a find replace. So if I hit the troll is going to be split across two roles. So the troll was also in the male ensemble. The troll was playing some dialogue stuff for the trolls. So the troll had a bit of stuff to do in the show, but for whatever reason, that track has to be split. Sometimes what often this happens when you have lots of ensemble big characters, someone's sick, and so the important dialogue lines will be nominally split to a person, but then the rest of the stuff they'll go on their main track, their usually ensemble track, or they'll do costume change and stuff. So you'll have they'll play one scene and they'll play a different role in the next scene. It can get quite complicated, all these sort of chops and changes. So if, say, I'm going to do a straight split first and then we can do something more complex. So if we say, let's start with the troll, and then we're going to move the troll to Dan. Let's start, modify this file. Going to go through every cue in the show where the troll is used and ask you to make a choice. So you can move this DCA assignment to Dan, so Dan will be a straight substitute. You can delete the troll from the queue completely. So I try to think of a useful scenario here. What I might do is, let's say this is interesting. So Trevor is an existing cast member, and let's say the troll can't perform today. So channel 12 is not going to be used at all in the show. That body pack is going to be turned off because that cast member is sick. And Trevor's going to take over some of the roles. So we see Trevor and the troll are in the same here in this first queue. So we're just going to say I'm going to keep Trevor there. And because we're keeping Trevor there, the troll's now bleed out. And we go to the next queue, same thing happens. Trevor and the troll, same thing. You know what? Trevor's going to be ensemble again, so that's fine. In this next scene here, this is when the troll had some dialogue. Trevor wasn't on stage. So our choices here are we can say, okay, Trevor is now going to play this, now going to say these roles. So Trevor's going to be moved to DCA 6. So if we do this, that troll is now moved down to Trevor. In this next thing here, there's now a song. And so normally in the show, Trevor would be in the ensemble for this song, but he's just been the troll. He's going to be in the troll costume. So it doesn't make sense to have him in this. It doesn't make sense for Trevor to go straight from the troll into this song. So we're actually going to delete him from this queue. Because in the next scene, he's in here. He's been the troll again. We want Trevor's going to play the troll role. We're going to move it down. And again, it's another song. He can't make that, but he's going to move. But then we get to the end of Act 1, and they were both in this anyway. So we can say, cool, we're going to keep Trevor on DCA 6. And then he's going to sing the troll solo line. So we actually want to move Trevor to the troll DCA and so forth. So basically what this does is it goes through every cue that the source channel's in and asks you to decide, is this going to go to somebody else, or is it going to be, is this going to go to somebody else, or what's going to happen, or is the somebody else not going to do their usual role and instead not be there? So it's a fairly intricate kind of use case because it doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, it's pretty messy. And so I usually recommend it does prompt to say, yes, have a new show file. But where this is super powerful is that, you can literally sit down with the stage manager, the director, or whoever's running the thing to say, cool, okay, in which scene, let's go through the show scene by scene, cue by cue. What is this actor going to do today? And I also found when that's happened, it helps the actor too, because they're told they're going to understudy a role or they're going to split their tracks and be a swing, but they never, particularly in amateur shows, it's not really well. The stuff isn't really well rehearsed. So to actually sit down with the actor and someone from the production team to go, cool, okay, in this scene, what are you doing? In this scene, you're doing the troll dialogue. Cool. Okay. This next scene, you're not singing because you got costume on. Cool. Okay. We'll take you out of that. And it actually helps them to just to sit down and go through cue by cue. It doesn't take long. And then that way the programming is going to be correct. And their mics are at the right time. But more importantly, it doesn't change how you mix the show. The whole point of this is that it's the same DCAs are in use. The same DCA names are in use. All that's changed is some of the channels get moved around underneath. If you're operating the show, it's going to feel like it did it before. Obviously, tonality-wise, the actors might have different voices, but you don't need to change the script. Don't need to do any patching on the console. Like it's all handed for you in the programming here, and it's do it once and then you can work it out. It's all fine. So this is a super powerful feature that hopefully most people never have to use, but when you do have to use it, it's designed to be fairly intuitive around, cool, okay, as you go through the show, what is this character doing? Where are they going to be? What's their role? And so that's, for me, that's kind of the split track problem is how to deal with that. And obviously this does make permanent changes to the show file. So I do recommend you make a new show file for this. And it prompts you to save it as when you go. But it's a little known feature, but it is quite powerful. Can also be used if, it is generally tricky to reorder channels. Once you've programmed something in here, it's kind of difficult to move it around. If you do need to move channels around, you can set up a brand new channel and just move stuff straight down and just say move the whole time and it'll move them through. So there's other use cases for it too, but principally it's the understudy problem. Cool. So one thing I don't think I talked about last time was channel monitoring, which is currently turned off on this show. So by default, when you create a show, this channel monitoring thing is turned on. So what TheatreMix does is it reads the metadata from the console. So, as you when you use the app and stuff, you have little meters bouncing around. And so TheatreMix reads that and looks at all the thresholds that are happening. So what it can do is that when a channel goes silent for a period of time, it'll put a blue indicator in the tray here and also set the color on the console to blue. Likewise, if the channel clips or is about to clip, like it's very close to clipping, it'll then flash up a red notification here in the tray and also do the same to the DCA and the channel on the console. So there's obviously lots of ways to do wireless micro monitoring. I mean, the manufacturers provide stuff. There's also things like Wavetool, which if you can use them are great. If you haven't got those resources, then this is kind of like a better than nothing. Like it tells you, it gives you a heads up as to when mics are dropping out, or they're clipping or whatever. And the clipping one's particularly useful if you've got like 20 mics up in an ensemble piece and you get a cable crackles and you don't know who it was. TheatreMix will go, cool, okay, this is the one that nearly clipped. The channel will be bright red on the console. You can just pull it out straight away and keep going and have to hunt around for where that clip happened. Yeah. And great for like pre-show checks and stuff. Yeah, just before we start the show, it's always good to see that, that there's signal coming in all the mics and there's no blue one working okay. Okay. Active queue information. So there's this. So one of the, not complaints, but one of the things that I found is that this queue list screen is very busy. And so it's great for editing, but during a show, there's a lot of stuff here that you don't really need to see all the DCA assignments as you're running a show. You just want to know what queue you're in. So this little active queue info thing pops out. And you can make it bigger and you can make this font. If you scroll, you can make the font bigger too. Yeah, and so this is designed to like sit on top of things. I think on Mac OS, it actually sits on top of other windows as well. Or if you've got like a little screen, like some people have like little USB monitors you can put on the console. This is kind of cute to put there, or even just like, yeah. But this is, it's a nice way just to show, okay, we're currently in Q7, and then the next queue is going to be Q8. And then as you progress to the show, it updates. This is kind of cool. Similarly, there's a similar feature here for queue info stibble strip. So this is originally designed around X32 consoles, but it works on other ones too. If you want to know, because TheatreMix queues are completely separate to everything that's happening on the console itself, you might want to know what you're up to. And so that active queue info display is kind of cool because it puts it on the screen beside you. But if you're looking down at the faders and you actually want to see where you are, make sure you're tracking the right queue as you are with the script. TheatreMix can put the current or the next queue number into a scribble strip. So left-right fade is what it does by default, the stereo bus, because that doesn't tend to move much in theatre shows. Or if you're using bigger consoles, you might have a band on a DCA. So it'll give you the option of any DCAs that aren't under TheatreMix control. So I'm using an X32 today, so it's only going to give me one. But for obviously for bigger consoles, it'll give you a lot more choices. So if you've sort of laid out your faders with like all your radio DCAs, then you might have like a reverb DCA and a band DCA. You can then use this to set the label of say the band DCA because you know it's the band, but it'll then say the queue number that you're in TheatreMix. So it's not an easy way to cross-reference stuff. Okay. Markers. So taking notes during a show is super painful, particularly if it's just you. If you've got a designer and the mixer, then you can sort of split the roles and it's not so bad. But if it's just one person designing and mixing and you're mixing a show and like something screws up and you want to remember that half an hour later because by the time it gets into the show, you've forgotten. There's a feature for that. So under here, you can select Mark Queue as a button option. That will give you a console button to mark queues. All that does though is so if I so it brings up a little box to type some notes. Queue is bad, and it just puts a little marker at the side here. So you just go, keep going, and then hit the mark queue button. So say we're in Q7, and then it's mark for R. So that's with the button, use the console button, it's easier. And then so it puts a little marker there. So what that means is that it doesn't really do anything in the show file, but like as you get the show, you just say, oh, okay, cool, something happened here, something happened there. Maybe there's some notes, something happened. And so when you get to the end of the night, you can then export the notes. So my computer is very laggy with all this screen sharing stuff. So I can save it to a file like that, and then export it to a file. And then if I pull up one of the many cool, it just gives you a nice little thing. So you can say, cool, okay, Q10, Q was bad. Whatever you typed in there, that notes are there. And it also gives you the timestamp of when that happened. So that I did that at 10:19 this morning. So it tells you exactly the time you press the button to mark the cue. Again, you may find this useful, you may find it not. I find the typing notes part is pretty much impossible during most shows because it's just the mixing too fast. But being able to punch in markers is kind of handy. So markers can be set. It's kind of handy. Again, handy just to say, cool, an event happened here, and then you get the report. The main thing is these are not saved with the show. So when I won't do it now, but when you close the show, it prompts you to save them, and then it deletes them straight away. So these are not like sort of like persistent notes where you want to like keep notes in the show file. It's more of a this happened during this run, and then move on. Okay, what was the Q&A? Is there a plan?
You got a question?
Yeah. Possibly, actually. I think Mark Q. Yeah, it made me think. I can't actually remember if Mark Q's are supported in the OSC API. I'll definitely think about that. That is very cool. I do like the idea. Yeah, good point. I'll add that to my list of stuff. Cool. And the other sort of UI thing I wanted to mention briefly was dim DCA faders. So there's a certain brand of consoles that have a sort of one of their features that they made for quick line-by-line mixing is when the faders are off, the DCA strip colors change. And so the idea is not so much for amateur shows, but for sort of shows that have really tight dialogue and you're doing like really tight fader throws, you want to know exactly what DCAs are on, and then the rest of them you don't care about. So what this does is that when you pull a DCA fader out, it sets the scroll strip to blue, and then as soon as it's up above, minus whatever, it then turns the scroll strip back on. So it's a very, very specific use case where you're doing very quick line-by-line throws. And essentially, it's like a heads-up display. So you're sort of in the show, and you know that, okay, at this point in the show, this is the pattern of what the scroll strip should look like. And it's like a pattern matching thing. And so, yeah, you're mixing by numbers, but it's also an assist for that. So I found it useful, again, when I'm mixing really tight line by line stuff, it's really useful. Not so useful when you're doing like school productions with like students who don't see their lines in order anyway. So you can't mix that closely anyway. But yeah, it does have its uses around very sort of tight line by line stuff. Cool. How are we going for time? Pretty good. Okay, there was just a couple of more things I wanted to cover around sort of alternate uses for features. So we talked about profiles last time, about being used for tonality changes or for pack swaps. But they can also be used for effects. So quite often, there's quite a lot of shows you need like a radio voice or a TV voice, like a drastic EQ change. And so one way to achieve that is to double patch the channel into a second channel and use that second channel with the really rough EQ to make it sound like it's on a little squawk box. If you don't have enough channels though, then you can use profiles for that. So in the past, I've done like jack radio voice, store EQ, and then just made the EQ for this second profile really like brutal, lots of high mid, make it really scratchy. And that's how you get your radio effect without having to burn up more channels, and so forth. And also something like that can be programmed beforehand because like jack Jack's primary EQ will obviously be set during line checks or, as the show goes on, but then the radio voice is generally, they're usually pretty, like it's similar EQ for all of them. So you can even sort of pre-plot that, in the console and then it'll just work. So that's kind of cool to do. Like, when I say effects, it's more like, tonetic stuff, but it's something different to just like compensating for hats or like physical costume stuff, which is where they get used more often. The other thing that can be kind of nifty is position buses. So we've talked about this last time. So primarily what these are intended for is, there's a few things. So they can be used if you're using like position matrix systems. So if you've got a DSP processor that's doing like multi-zone timing stuff for a really complex sound system, and you have like a bus per zone, you can do that. So you can say, okay, this one's going to be bus 1 and that one's going to be bus 2, and then essentially that means that all the mics in this position get routed to one bus, add to a DSP. The DSP does all the time alignment, and it all sounds nice. That's what it's intended for, but it can also be used for stuff like spot speakers. So if, say, most of the show, you've got the mics come out at the center channel, but then in part of the show you need a voice to come out of like a spot speaker on stage or a rear surround or something that's got to be thrown somewhere else. So that's where this is kind of handy, because you can say, okay, I don't want it to go to the center channel anymore, but let's say bus 1 is my on-stage spot for, again, a radio voice, TV voice, something like that. So this allows, position buses can be used for that kind of thing where, like, okay, I need to throw this voice to a specific source in the theater, and you can use this to pick where it's going to come from. But also, there's other stuff you use it for too. I often find it depends on the geometry of the venue and like your system coverage and what sort of stuff. But I find sometimes not having my ensemble on the center channel is kind of handy, particularly like for songs where there's like dialogue, and then there's like backing vocals at the side kind of thing, or like some oohs and ahs and those kind of where it's like dramatic but not yet necessarily the clarity. So I'll often find that, okay, I might have left, right, and center for this, but then I'll have like a BV's position that just has left, right. And so, again, it depends on the system coverage and the shape of the venue and that sort of stuff. But sometimes I found actually dropping the vocals out of that center cluster stylistically makes sense in some parts of a show, particularly if you need to add more clarity to certain characters that are on stage and sort of push the rest out. So that kind of subsystem routing is kind of useful, and obviously you can get quite fancy with this, obviously, if you have different buses to use for different submixes. Another thing you can use this for instead is if you use different group processing. So some people like to run ensembles, not like leads and ensembles with different processing groups. So maybe this might be the lead groups there on bus 1 and then ensembles on bus 2. Because maybe what you want to do is maybe the ensemble group gets compressed a bit harder. Maybe it's the EQ is a bit more brutal to deal with gain before feedback issues. And so, yes, they're not. It's not a literal position. They're not. There's not the ensemble aren't staying in the same spot every time, but you can use the position construct as a way to achieve kind of routing changes based on whether this person is currently doing a lead line or a lead part or an ensemble part. Which is, it's kind of cool. And so it's not necessarily the intent of positions per se, but it means you can program it into all the cues, which is nice. Likewise too, vocal fallback in musical theatre is a touchy subject because generally, most people say no, but it seems a lot of the pro shows are starting to do a bit of it now and get away with it. So there may be times where you do need to add vocal fallback for certain moments in a show. And so again, this is kind of useful for that, because a bit like the spot speaker case, you could say, okay, there's a position that has the fallback speaker included. And so you can include that there. And so when you get to that cue, it'll route it to that fallback speaker as well. But most of the time you don't want vocal fallback on stage, particularly with Omni mics, because it's going to be a nightmare. But if you do need it for specific moments in the show, you can use this to sort of isolate out that routing and do it that way.
James,
cool.
A quick question around that before you.
Yep.
Oh, you've already closed it. Sorry. The buses. How do you handle when there are stereo buses?
So it doesn't care. So like on, for instance, it's really an Allen and Heath thing. So Allen and Heath differentiate between stereo and mono buses. So when you have an Allen and Heath console, it'll give you the stereo and mono options separately.
Yeah, but can you can't use the LCR to do a stereo, like to pick a position in the LR between stereo buses?
Yeah, you can. So like So if this was a Allen Heath console and you picked a stereo bus, then that pan would work. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So bus 3 would be the whole stereo. I'm thinking if it's like bus 3, 4 are the stereo bus, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay. If it's like an X32 one where they're linked, then they're not easily. But then again, having said that, it depends what mode they're in, right? So if they're in subgroup mode on an X32, then you only need to pick one of them because it'll automatically route to the other one, and then you can then pan that as well. So it depends how it's been set up on the console. Yeah.
Okay. So just carefully set it up. Yeah.
Be careful. That's I guess that's probably a nice way to actually end this. Actually, is that I guess there's all these sort of cool features. I've gone through a lot today. The first session was about this software is like great and safe, and do what you want. And it's not going to surprise you. I guess today is like be careful. Be careful what you ask for, because you can. It's really powerful, but also you really have to have an intent behind what you're doing. Particularly stuff like this, if you just go into position setup and just start picking some buses willy-nilly and then run the show, and you wonder why the routing's all over the place. It's because if you do this, it will do what you ask it to, which is if you're intent on that, great. But if you're not intent on that, it is very easy to go down the weeds. Yeah. That was kind of all I had on my notes from what we missed out last time, and a few other bits and pieces. Cool. I guess open any more questions when I come in on the Zoom chat.
No, I think that's everything we had in there. Does anyone have any questions they want to get answered before we finish things up? I know a lot of people had to drop off because it's the
timing.
We've gone over, and I apologize everyone that we had those issues and started late, but there will be a recording if anybody missed beginning or end, that kind of thing.
And we'll cut out the bits that didn't work.
Yeah. And we will send that out. But thank you so much, James, for doing this and for pitching in with our internet issues. Very much appreciate you walking everybody through this. And I've got lots of thoughts, lots of questions stirring, but we'll
it's always the way though.
Like how to implement this and ways to do things. It's great. I'm not seeing anything else come in here. We got a thank you.
Cool.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, I hope everyone has a good day or a good night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And reach out to us if you want anything specific in another training session, or if you have just any specific questions.
And likewise,
Tech Direction.
But so likewise last time for TheatreMix, there's the Facebook group, sort of the main place where things happen. So if you have any queries, go to the Facebook group first. You'll probably find them answered there, or if not, there's lots of cool people willing to help out. And then if not, drop me an email.
For sure. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you so much, James, and hope everyone has a good day.